Hey everybody, KMO here. It is Tuesday. We're doing the live stream, and I'm joined by a longtime Sea Realm guest, Larry Lowe. Larry is my go-to guy for talking about UFOs and aliens, either aliens from elsewhere or aliens from here. I think ultra-terrestrials is the name of that notion. But Larry, good to talk to you again.
KMO, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Lived through COVID thus far.
Knock wood. All right. Well, you've got a presentation up on screen for us. So let me ask you to take us through it and give us a timeline of this whole UFO disclosure business.
Okay, I'm going to take the first maybe quarter of the program to set the stage for where we are now in the process of changing the mindset, the socially acceptable paradigm for discussion of the subject. Okay, and the reason I'm doing that is since 2007, have been very important. We've seen probably more change in the last 2 or 3 years than we've seen in my lifetime. And the basic concept is it's now okay to talk about UFOs. It's a legit subject. The taboo is over with. And we're pretty pleased with that. But it is a small step for mankind. So the current news cycle, if you've been paying any attention, is all about the fact that there is a report due to the Senate Intelligence Committee from a sub-appointed committee called the UAP Task Force, due to drop next month. And the UFO community is of the opinion that this is going to be the great revelation of all time. I'll explain later why I think that's probably too optimistic and not really the case. But here's the background. In 2007, the then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, who was like the third most powerful guy in the government after the vice president, initiated a program that was called the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Applications Program, AAWASAP. And the idea was that this program had a purview to study unexplained aerial phenomena, because the government was really tired of Freedom of Information Request Act requests for UFO information. So they changed it to UAP, and then they could say, well, no, we haven't got any UFO stuff. The program was begun at the Defense Intelligence Agency in 2007, and it was budgeted for $22 billion for over 5 years. And Reed was a senior senator, and he went to a guy by the name of Stevens from Alaska, who's a senior senator and Republican, and Inouye, who was a senator from Hawaii, and they only needed 3 guys to do this. So they slipped this little special access program appropriation into the budget without anybody else knowing really why it was there. And they got $20 million of seed money, and they gave it to some guys, and a fellow by the name of Lou Elizondo ended up running it for a while. Now, this was somewhat at the behest of a a Nevada housing billionaire by the name of Robert Bigelow. He and Reed had been friends for a long time. And a lot of people would say, well, this is pork, and Bigelow is just looking for free money from the government to do nothing because it's a nonsense subject. Not the case. Robert Bigelow is worth billions. $20 million is not much. He just wanted to get the program formally set up. Then he turned right around and contracted to it to do a lot of the work. And a lot of the actual work that was done, or at least the analytical work, was done at Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Systems, BASS, in Las Vegas. Nobody knew this was going on. This was 2007. And just to kind of move a little further down the timeline, the first time I had an opportunity to talk with you was in 2010, 3 years later. And unbeknownst to me or you, the AAWSAP program was going. But at the time, there was a program called The Event. And I was writing for the Examiner. And I had some pretty good, solid inside information that the event was going to be the revelation to the public of America by the sitting president of the United States of the existence of aliens among us, and intelligent life, and UFOs are real, and make the great disclosure speech, which is the wet dream of a lot of people who ought to know better, because that kind of thing I don't think is going to happen, certainly in my lifetime.
Hey, Larry, let me pause for just a second and just clarify that when you say there was a program called The Event, you're talking about not a government program, but a TV show.
That is correct.
Yeah.
There was a television program on NBC, as a matter of fact, featuring a thinly disguised version of Barack Obama as president, and the usual suspects around him who were keeping him from the truth. And he said at one point to, I don't know, the chief of staff or somebody, he says, I'm the president of the United States. I have a need to know. And when he found out what they told him, he said, we need to tell the American people. And this was grand and noble and wonderful. And the idea being that if you present that whole process in fiction on television, then the American population kind of gets a little bit used to the psychic shock of UFOs are real, because until then we all know they weren't, right? That was the plan. UFOs aren't real. It's all to be dismissed. The broadcasting corporation that put it up, I think NBC, changed hands a couple of times. They went through 5 directors, and the scene we were waiting for never actually happened, and it got off in a little bit different realm. But my point was that disclosure happens in America when people talk to other people about it. And that's what I meant by viral at that stage. I'm not talking about using Twitter or your Facebook account. I'm saying talk to your family, your friends, your coworkers, and when it's a legitimate subject for conversation at that level over the water cooler, as I put it, that's when disclosure will happen, because disclosure in the sense of the change of mind that you have to realize that UFOs are real is a very personal thing and has a lot to do with your own psyche, and everybody's got to make it for themselves. No amount of presidential proclamation is going to do it for you. You've got to internalize this. They're here, and they have been for a very long time. Okay, so that was the idea behind viral disclosure. A year goes by, we talk again. I had a program called Another Tenant in the Building. And the premise behind that was a quote by the great late bard Terence McKenna. And he did a conference with Jacques Vallée about angels, aliens, and archetypes. And he was espousing his view of the UFO phenomenon. For those of you that are not clear, Terence McKenna was justifiably famous as a so what would you call him, Cam? How do you describe Terence McKenna?
He is a raconteur. I've heard him called a psychedelic stuntman. He would get up on stage and just sort of free associate. He had a prodigious memory, and he was quite the reader. And he had a lot of material to draw upon, and he had just a glorious gift for gab. He could just delve into the contents of his mind and bring stuff out in real time and just sort of throw it out to a live audience in a way that kept people's attention absolutely, kept them riveted, kept them on the edge of their seats.
And he had done a lot of DMT. He'd done a lot of DMT. He was in ayahuasca, and on a trip in the jungle one time, he saw UFOs. Now,
interestingly about that, the UFO he saw, we won't call it a UFO. It was a flying saucer, but it was a real life experience of a flying saucer that was itself a hoax image. It was a known hoax. So that's what whatever powers decided to show him was something that he could see right in front of him was a real thing, but which had been clearly established years before as a fake.
Well, there's a couple of things to respond to that, but I don't really want to because I'm going down my timeline.
Go ahead.
But the phenomenon has a propensity to show you things that are not there exactly, or things only you can see, or whatever. The point being, he saw what he perceived to be a UFO and took it as a UFO sighting. And so consequently, when he came to this meeting, he said, and so he's the drug guy, and Jacques Vallée is the straight the scientist fellow, and they were having a conversation. And McKenna said, "Look, there's three possibilities. It's us, it's them from out there, or there's another tenant in the building." And that statement went, "Oh, wait a minute. What if a co-indigenous higher species was operating, and we only knew about it through these little bits and pieces and glimmers and shows because they didn't make a big deal about, following, normal air traffic routes." So we did a whole thing on another tenant in the building. Now, both of these are, I think, worth reviewing by the audience if they haven't heard them, because it's relevant to where we're going to be in a bit. Now, moving ahead to 2013, this is 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 6 years later, Robert Bigelow goes on a program called Coast to Coast with eminent journalist George Knapp. And Knapp interviews him about what the state of the world is with UFOs and disclosure and all of that. Now, Bigelow is nothing if not pragmatic. He is direct, to the point. He knows how to make money. He knows how to engineer. He gets things done, and he doesn't screw around. And he said in that coast to coast interview, you're not going to get disclosure. Disclosure is not what you even want. America can't handle disclosure. If I could do some Jack Nicholson. What you're going to get is you're going to get a thing called confirmation. Confirmation that UFOs are real is nothing more than the government saying UFOs are real, and we don't know necessarily what they are, but we're handling it so you can go back to worrying about baseball. And that's it. It's not disclosure that, oh, we know exactly what star they come from, what color their skin is, and how many of them there are, and all the minutiae that is expected in some grand proclamation by the president or by Congress or in this report that's coming up. Bigelow said, look, all you got to do is confirm that they're there. That lets everybody off the hook, and we can go back to doing what we were doing. And then he proceeded to describe what by now it was called AATIP. The original program had morphed a little bit, and BASS, Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Systems, was doing the work. And he explained all this in 2013 to the public without necessarily naming the program, because certain things they didn't want to actually get into. Okay. Now, here's one of the big events of the entire process. This is a big deal. December 16th, 2017, an article appears in the New York Times, Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program. Now, this was big news because in 1968, Edward R. Condon had been commissioned out of the University of Colorado to gather a bunch of scientists together and do a report on the veracity of UFO sightings at the heist of the Air Force, who was really getting tired of operating Blue Book and saying they're all, weather balloons. And Condon wrote a report and said, if you read his introduction and his summation, that's all you read. The report says there's nothing to UFOs. There's no national security problem. It doesn't represent an issue worth science paying any attention to. It doesn't represent an issue worth the Air Force paying any attention to, or academia. And the next day, the United States Air Force closed Blue Book, and we were officially out of the UFO investigation business in 1968. And it had been that way right up until December 16th, 2017. Leslie Kean and a fellow by the name of Blumenthal broke this story in the New York Times, and with it, they had 3 videos: Tic Tac, Gimbal, and Fast Mover, whatever it is. And if you haven't seen those videos, you've been living underneath a rock, because they're the ones that always get shown, right? But those videos were Navy taken forward infrared looking radar off of an AF-18 strike fighter off the coast of San Diego and Virginia, respectively, by folks on duty in the Navy chasing these things. And those videos and the power of Leslie Kean's writing and the gravitas of the New York Times is why this was such a big exclamation point. This is the first time that it ever came to light what had been put together, a decade earlier in 2007, is that right? Yeah. It was a decade after the ATIP program was started before it became public news. Well, there was a series of follow-on articles in ABC, Politico, Newsweek, Popular Mechanics. Everybody kind of covered the story over again, and then it sort of drizzled out after about 6 months. And the next big event is On February 11th, and by the way, on the left is the dark world items, and on the right is the white world items. February 11th, 2019, 2 years later, the Federation of American Scientists gets a list from the Defense Intelligence Agency of ATIP project papers, and they had to file a FOIA to do this. Okay, what are the ATIP project papers? Well, how it worked was government gave ATIP some money. ATIP contracted with Bass. Bass hired a guy by the name of Hal Puthoff. Hal Puthoff put together a baker's dozen of the absolute best minds that he could find. And he said, write me a paper on, one of the following subjects. It kind of depends upon who you are, what you got. Inertial electrostatic confinement fusion. This was a possible way to get enough energy to do one of these things. Another point was 0-point energy extraction. That's the seething foam of photons and electrons coming in and out of existence at the very core bottom of reality. Okay, and that if you could put a diode on that, it's like putting a dam up in a tide basin, and you can jack a little energy out of it all the time. If you could tap into 0-point energy, you could tap into an enormous amount of energy, and that was what was required. Puthoff himself wrote a paper on advances in space propulsion based on vacuum space-time metrics. Now, the metric is how you measure something. And you measure something either it's a foot long, or it's an hour long. Space and time have units of. Now, if you can vary the metric, in other words, if a foot is not always a foot, because you can condense it because you're going close to the speed of light or whatever, then inside the field, if you can create a field that does that, called the Albuquerque field, you can warp space-time, and you don't have to bother with traversing space. You kind of whiz from here to there. And he explained in his paper how it would all work and what the side effects would be. If one was going, what would you get out of it? And I wrote a private white paper pointing out the correlation between Puthoff's predictions and the observed characteristics of the UFOs that Vallée and Davis had characterized in their paper, and that was reported at Rendlesham. And so I typed this thing all up like I know what I'm doing, and I sent it to Puthoff, and his reaction was, I was wondering when somebody would get it. Because what Puthoff was doing was back engineering the field effect propulsion they suspected might be going on in UFOs. That group at ATIP also looked into invisibility cloaking, traversable wormholes, anti-gravity. There were several different papers on that. What's called metamaterials, materials that are of unbelievably complex and unusual construction that do certain things, and they don't do anything that we have any application for here on the planet, and we don't know how to make them if we had an application for them. But the only things we've seen that exhibit these kinds of characteristics are reputed to be recovered from a crash site or ejected from a saucer or something like that. And one of the last thing was programmable matter. The idea that we can create, say, an aircraft wing and it can morph and change airfoil like a bird in flight. The shape of everything is malleable. So all of these subjects were treated by PhD level guys thinking 15, 20, 50 years ahead of time. And they put that all together and said, now, do we have a recipe for how you might build a UFO? Do we have enough engineering? Do we have enough technology? Is there enough theory here? Will this work? So that's why these DIA papers in 2019 are important, because it confirms that. Now, in May, interestingly enough, the Pentagon confirms that ATIP, quote, did pursue research and investigation in unidentified aerial phenomena. which is a hell of a lot less than what I just told you. So the government is just barely admitting what's going on. But yeah, ATIP did look into that. So a year passes, and the main players behind the program seem to be Christopher Mellon, primarily, former Undersecretary of Defense for Clinton, and a guy named Lou Elizondo, who had headed up the ATIP program, and those two got together, and they've been kind of driving the process. In February 24th of 2020, now this is back in the dark area on the left of our stuff that the public didn't really know about. Senators Rubio, Marco Rubio, Florida, and Kamala Harris got classified briefing on UFO sightings and encounters and unidentified aerial phenomena. They closed the doors. This was the Senate Select Intelligence Committee, and they briefed them on the subject. And everyone came out. There's a video of one of the guys came out of the meeting, and he was just kind of like glassy-eyed. He said, "I think we probably need to look into this." That's all he could say. But that briefing is very important because it put the bug in everybody's ear that mattered, Senator Rubio probably the most, that this was a legitimate deal. And the Navy was running into these things. The Air Force probably was too. They just probably weren't talking about it. The very next day, on February 25th, the Navy confirms the existence of unidentified flying objects in those films that were released back in 2017. It took them 3 years to say to the American public, yes, those are Navy films. Yes, those are objects. No, we don't know if they're flying. And yes, they're unidentified because we don't know what they are. And right there is a Navy admission that UFOs exist, because we got 3 examples right on the screen. But it's interesting, the timing was like right after that briefing. Somebody called somebody and started to work the chain of public awareness forward. The Navy finally said they're there. So go ahead, February to June, 5 months or so. Rubio inserts language into a report to the Budget Committee from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence to fund the UFO task force. Okay, and it said, now this is a report from the Committee on Intelligence to the Budget Committee saying, we recommend you fund the following. 2020 Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021 includes funding for the UAP task force. The committee supports the efforts of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force at the Office of Naval Intelligence to standardize collection and reporting on unidentified aerial phenomena, any links they might have to adversarial foreign powers, and the threat they pose to United States military assets and installations. Therefore, the committee directs the Director of National Intelligence, in consultation with the Secretary of Defense and the heads of such other agencies as the Director and Secretary jointly consider relevant, which is a loophole, to submit a report within 180 days of the date of enactment of the Act to the Congressional Intelligence and Armed Services Committees on Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, also known as anomalous aerial vehicles. And I don't know why the UFO committee hasn't just foiled their brains out on AAV, because there's probably a lot of references to that where there isn't references to UAV, including observed airborne objects that have not been identified. So that was the scope of the funding requested and the report requested and he slipped it into language in the movie, in the recommendations to the Budget Act. Now, the Budget Act wouldn't be passed for a while, but that was the key event that followed on after the briefing. Obviously, they told him something behind closed doors he thought was pretty important. Now, in October of 2020, and I want to give a heads up to our video guy, James Fox released a movie called Phenomenon, and it was his life's work. It was his fourth time around. He doesn't make very many movies, but when he does, he makes them, very seriously and with a passion. It came out at exactly the right time, and it encapsulated all of the enthusiasm that had been building towards bringing this forward. And if we could play the video now, that's the Phenomenon trailer, it would be good for the audience to see just a taste of what that movie was about.
I knew this was breaking news for the front page of the New York Times.
My gosh. Look at that thing.
We need to accept that we are not alone in the universe.
The federal government, all these years, has covered up everything. It's very, very bad for our country.
There have been visitation, crashed craft, material recovered.
It was not anything from this earth. All I could do is keep a mouth shut.
The public has a right to know.
There's a tremendous resistance.
I guarantee every one of them knows that this event happened.
Hiding these dark secrets even from elected presidents.
They came running up here in such a panic. Child can't make that up.
Declassified government documents confirm ongoing UFO incursions at nuclear weapons sites.
Are you saying that there's some evidence that still hasn't seen the light of day?
I'm saying most of it hasn't seen the light of day.
These things are real. They're here. This is happening now.
So I didn't hear the audio on that. Hopefully folks on the stream could hear the audio. I'm getting a nod from Colin. So that was for a documentary called Phenomenon by James Fox.
What that did was it just said, if you looked at the credits, everybody in the world said this is one of the most important films ever made on the subject, or words to that effect. So Phenomenon is out there. If you want to catch up with where we are in the timeline now, go watch it. It brought me out of retirement because I had quit writing for the field because there's a point where there's just no point. And I came back to work at medium.com, and I wrote a review, and with the review notes will probably have a URL. But it was actually part and parcel of this because Christopher Mellon opens up the movie saying it's time that humanity comes to grips and pays attention to the fact that we're not the only intelligence around, and we need to start acting like it, or words to that effect. So it couldn't have been better time, and was actually not related exactly to these earlier works, but it dovetailed. So October, November, December, as Trump has lost the election, I guess, by then, and is on his way out the door, the budget gets passed, and the COVID relief bill, $900 billion, gets passed. And in that, the Intelligence Authorization Act that Rubio authored got passed. So the clock started to tick at that point. The deadline was 6 months later. That's now June 2021 for the report to come, because the act was passed that was funded and the needs outlined by the Intelligence Committee. And things begin to happen very quickly. That same month, and this is a piece I don't understand, a guy by the name of Chaim Eshed, the former head of Israel's Defense Ministry Space Directorate, and a long list of positions, at the in the Israeli government and academia said the unidentified flying objects have asked not to publish that they are here. Humanity is not ready yet. Israel knows they're here. Trump knows they're here. Some of the governments know they're here. But let's not make a big deal about it publicly because they kind of want to maintain a low profile. That was his statement passed on from the UFOs he was talking to about we weren't ready. And I may contend that we're probably done. But it was like out of nowhere. Who's this guy? Israel. Israel's in the UFO business all of a sudden. March 23rd of 2021, a former Trump director of national intelligence tells Fox News that the UAP task force must be made public and it will be big. He went on to say what a very important critical thing this was and how it was going to open everybody's eyes and spill all the beans. But it had to be, because the way it stands right now, that report only needs to go to the Intelligence Committee. It doesn't need to go to the public. So when the Director of National Intelligence tells you that an intelligence report needs to be made public, there must be some reason for that. So we moved from April to March 2021 this year. Now things are happening like once a month. A reporter at large for the New Yorker magazine, a guy who had no dog in the fight, no prior experience, totally even-handed, sat down, starting with Leslie Keane, and went through everything to date, all the way up to where the director of national intelligence says this needs to be made public, and wrote this article, How the Pentagon Started Taking UFOs Seriously. And I could put a colon on that. The after title is, and why you should. For decades, flying saucers were a punchline. Then the United States government got over the taboo, which is just exactly the right way to phrase it. The taboo, the information embargo, whatever you want to call it, has been there since forever. But they got over it. They didn't have any choice. They got drugged, kicking and screaming, because too many people were making too much noise and showing up and writing articles, and they realized that we're going to have to get over saying they're not real. And who is the young man that you pointed me towards that runs the UFO guy at the TV show you watched in the morning?
So I think you're thinking of Sagar and Jetty on Rising.
Correct. He said this article was the first draft of history. And I would tell you that this article, if you had to throw a dart at the calendar, just to specify when the UFO truth embargo taboo ended, it was when this article, hit print. It's on the web, it's in print, and there's a companion NPR podcast. Go read this, because it tells you how everything was up until April 30th of this year. Big deal. On May 5th, the Inspector General launches an evaluation into the UAP task force, and specifically the responses of the tasked agencies to respond to the UAP task force into actions regarding unidentified aerial phenomena. Reason being, the task force was set up, they had their marching orders, and they had a purview and a staff, and you got like a captain in the Navy or a colonel in the Air Force running this thing. He's got to go into 1 stars and 2 stars and say, tell me everything you know about UFOs. And all that guy has to do is say, well, we don't have much, which is shorthand for you don't have any need to know, and I don't want to cooperate. And so that got leaked to the Inspector General, who's now bird dogging ostensibly the rest of the government to cooperate with the task force. That's a rather remarkable thing. And I've got this halfway between black and halfway between white on the thing because it's a little spooky there. As a practical matter, I don't think the Inspector General is going to scare anybody that happens to be deeply entrenched in the DIA somewhere, that happens to know a little bit of something. And so it may very well be that the task force will get stonewalled. Meanwhile, at that same time, Christopher Mellon appears on the Joe Rogan podcast. And Joe Rogan's a little spotty. His characters are a little spotty. They come good. Sometimes he does good, sometimes he's not, you know. But Rogan did a particularly coherent, calm, thoughtful, tossing softballs right across the plate for Christopher Mellon to hit deep into the right field. And Mellon, for his part, delivered a calm, thoughtful, meaningful presentation of what was going on to date, what the issues were. Of particular interest in this podcast, Rogan asked Mellon, what should we do? What would you do if you were going to try to figure this all out? And Christopher Mellon sits back for a little minute and he thinks and says, well, I'll tell you what I'd do. I would go look at the data we've already got to see what we've overlooked. When you take radar data in from a massively sensitive network like the Distant Early Warning Line or NORAD or those guys, it's covering everything bigger than a moth, you know, all the way around the world to, you know, Afghanistan. You got to get a bunch of clutter off the screen because you got to give your operator the right view. So if some guy's driving along in a Cessna 150 at 2,000 feet over Kansas, well, don't show that to the operator. He has no need to know that that guy's down there. Now, by the same logic, if something appears to be going 3,000 miles across the screen and takes a sudden right-hand turn towards the North Pole, you don't show that to the radar operator either, because that doesn't make any sense. That's nothing flies like that. So the guys who wrote the algorithms took these things out of the displays, but it's in the data. And Mellon said, I would put some guys together. Then he listed about 5 other things. And I would tell you that what Christopher Mellon did in the last part of that show was write his own job description, which might be a good thing. May 14th, okay, the Pentagon confirms the authenticity of the USS Omaha video. And that's that other little bit of video I gave you, if you could just show it. I don't think there's much audio with it, but you're going to see a black dot and some blurry thing. And then you're going to see it appear to go into the ocean. We need to play about 30 seconds of that is all, if we could. The Omaha video.
It's on now. And you see the black dot.
Took off, booking it.
Looks like the FLIR camera has locked onto it because it's consistently in the center of the screen now. It's a very grainy image, so
Omaha,
from my perspective, I don't see a whole lot happening. It's just the black dot.
Just watch the dot.
Okay.
Now you see it.
We're making 10, so we can
probably
do
you won't.
35 relative. Sir.
Yeah, I bring it down.
We got a lot of white water up there, some 6-foot swells.
Whoa, it's getting close.
Assuming we started it at the right place.
We have 31 knots sustained wind, topside, gust.
Right. The dot, it looks like it's above, it looks like it's just disappeared into the ocean.
Mark bearing and range.
Okay, stop the video. It looks like it disappeared into the ocean. The guy on the radio or on the background says splash, and another voice says mark bearing. Let's find out what happened. And the words are that it went directly into the water.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to think it sort of shrank out of existence because it is blurry and it's not great video. But this appeared, this was like the 5th leaked video in a row beyond the ones that originally came out. And one of the key things of the UFO UAP phenomenon, one of the points they always harp on is what's called transmedium behavior. And the medium is what you're operating in. And if you're in space, you're operating in a vacuum. There's nothing to push against. So reaction motors don't work. Well, reaction motors work, but propellers don't work because there's no air. Airplanes are subject to the pressure and the behavior of the medium of air molecules, nitrogen, oxygen, etc. And they got to move those molecules out of the way, and the propeller moves them, and the wing lifts them, and that's how airplanes work. And submarines have got to do the same thing with water molecules. Now, water is substantially thicker than air, so the hydrodynamic drag is significantly greater than aerodynamic drag. Point being, the UAPs that seem to be genuine exhibit the characteristic that they go from the air down into the ocean without a big splash, without disturbing anything, and then travel at high speed underwater, just as if they were traveling at high speed in the air. And when they're in the air, they don't make a sonic boom because they don't generate a shock wave off the lifting surface of the wing because they're not moving air molecules around to traverse from one point to another. They are in a field that is sliding through the medium, but not affecting it. It's a very difficult thing to try to envision. But that seems to be what's going on. And it goes on underneath the water just as well as it does in the air. So transmedium is a big deal. And on May 14th of this year, the Pentagon said, yes, that was an authentic United States Navy video. Yes, it was taken on board a Navy craft. And yeah, we don't know what that thing was. 2 days later, the third in our major series of media events occurs. May 16th, 60 Minutes does a 15-minute segment on the UAP. And they bring together Commander David Fravor and now Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich. She had maintained anonymity earlier on, didn't want to be identified, I think, while she was active duty because she liked to fly the airplanes and didn't want to jeopardize her status on flight ops. She's now teaching for a living. So she came on, and that was the big news. Everything else was more or less the same, except that it was 60 Minutes that did this. 60 Minutes set off a big ripple. Of the Washington Post covered it, the New York Times covered it, Popular Mechanics covered it, CNN covered it, Fox News covered it. Everybody echoed this. May 21st, Harry Reid pens an op-ed in the New York Times saying something in effect of what we okay, that's the spectrum. I got to keep my notes in order here. What we know about UFOs. And his concluding sentence was, I've never intended to prove that life beyond Earth exists. But if science proves it does, I have no problem with that. Because the more I learn, the more I realize there's still so much more I don't know. And so they're reaffirming the idea here. All we're saying is that you got to be honest with the reality of the people that see them. UFOs are real. Nobody is making any assumptions about aliens yet. And that will take a lot more work, and it's a different issue, and that happens when disclosure occurs. Now, you are here. This is today. 4 days later, May 25th, my contention is confirmation has happened. Oh, wait a minute. Did I have the Obama video up there?
Colin, do we have a video from Barack Obama?
President Barack Obama talks UFOs with talk show host James Corden.
There's footage and records of objects in the skies that we don't know exactly what they are. We can't explain how they moved, their trajectory. And so, I think that people still take seriously trying to investigate and figure out what that is.
Mr. Obama says UFOs were actually one of the first things he asked about.
Okay, you can stop it there. Okay, that is the last guy that was in the White House telling you that UFOs are a thing. Okay, that is confirmation, except he's not in the White House anymore. But the guy that's in the White House now, I think is going to get around to something like that. And that's it. Now, if you're sitting here now, and if you follow me all the way through this, then here's the deal, kids. It's okay to talk about them. It's okay to read the material. It's okay to speculate because they're there, whatever they are. And we've got confirmation from the government and whoever's important that needs to be important. Now, the next thing to happen in this whole grand exercise is the UAP task force is going to report to the Senate Intelligence Committee sometime next month. Now, the retail ufology guys are running around like this is it. Moses himself is going to come down from the mountain and tell us all about the aliens. And I'm telling you that what they're going to say is, yes, there's a lot of unidentified object reports. Yes, we have now got procedures to allow them to come up the chain of command. It will not affect your career if you report them. They're all going to go to some office and get dealt with. And we've got top men working on this project right now. And if there's any doubt in your mind, those are top men, Indy. So you can just go back to Kansas and teach college and don't worry about it. The Ark is in safe hands. And that's what I call Ed Condon 2.0. And they will put the thing back to bed, put the cat back in the bag and said, know what? We're not telling you everything that we could. And we're not telling you stuff we don't know. And we're not revealing any classified sources. But yes, if you want to talk about UFOs, that's fine. The whole idea from the commission in 1953 helped me out here. I've told you about this in the earlier works. The commission in 1953 said that we need to make the whole thing taboo, and they did a very good job of it. That's over with.
When was Project Blue Book?
Project Twining wrote a memo in 48 to his superior. That became, he was tasked to create Project Sign. Project Sign turned in a report that said, Jesus, there's something here. That was rejected by the then Hap Arnold. Said, don't write me a report that says they're here. I ain't reading it. Go write a better report. They came back and wrote a report that says, oh, wait a minute, we were mistaken. There's nothing to it. You said, good. They changed that to Project Grudge. And Project Grudge evolved to Project Blue Book probably in 52, 53. Well, it was there by 52 because when the Washington merry-go-round, the 2-weekend air show of flying saucers over Washington, D.C. happened, Edward Ruppel of Blue Book was flown in to try to explain this to everybody, and nobody had any explanations. So Project Blue Book went from 1951, give or take, to 1968. And ever since then, there's been nothing. Because you know what? We just don't even care. All right? So.
Larry, we're actually pretty close to the end of our time here. But when I hear the government, when I hear the Pentagon, and when I hear the former president or mainstream news organizations like 60 Minutes or New York Times Magazine or CNBC, when I hear them talking about UFOs, my first question is always, what story are they directing our attention away from with this talk? I mean, you've presented it as the Pentagon has had to make concessions to all of this public opinion and all of these reported, sightings, pieces of video. But from my perspective, they successfully suppressed all that for half a century, and I suspect they could go on suppressing it if it was to their interest to do so. It strikes me that the Pentagon, possibly elements within the federal government, have some reason for directing our attention to this material at this time, and I just wonder what that would be.
Well, you're asking me to speculate, which I'm not inclined to do. And second of all, I would kind of back up and say a little bit as far as the elements of the government. There's a few guys running around saying this is important, it's got to come out, now's the time. And they're bowing to the pressure that started. Ultimately, I think we're going to lay the hero mantle on Chris Mellon.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, the bulk of the government's got way better things to do than deny UFOs, and they got far better ways to distract our attention from whatever they don't want us to hear. And that I have no idea. I mean, it could be anything. But I would not say that that's a particularly, I understand your reasoning, but I think that's kind of looking at the whole thing from over here a little bit, when we could just look at it straight ahead and say, you know what? They're making it okay to talk about UFOs, but they're going to end up not admitting very much more than that. And they're still not going to tell us what they really know. No, that's not coming out.
So your prediction is that this report that's supposed to come out in June isn't going to be released to the public. It will just be presented to whatever committee it's supposed to be presented to, and nobody else.
First of all, it might not get access to the material it needs to because it could be stonewalled internal.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, it might get presented to the Senate Intelligence Committee and lie right there. Chances are it's going to have to be revealed in some form. Chances are that form will cause President Biden to say, okay, I'm going to appoint somebody to look after this. Oh, I know, Chris Mellon, he is the new Undersecretary for Extraterrestrial Affairs or Non-Human Intelligence Affairs. We're going to give him a budget and an office and some guys. He's going to handle the problem. Do I need to say anything else? No, I don't. I'm done. That's it.
Okay.
And we'll go back to, okay, shit. Excuse me. That's that. And the thing will kind of quietly go back to bed. You're going to stuff the cat back in the bag, and no one will know what's in there, whether there's a cat or not. Scroninger told us it's indeterminate what's in the bag.
Yep. Well, Larry, I do need to bring this stream to a conclusion, but thank you very much for that roundup. I appreciate it.
Sorry for taking so much time, but glad to be here.
Take care.
Bye.
All righty.